People already coming in. Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to another webinar of Workplace Leadership series with Gable. While everyone is trickling in, just some housekeeping items. A recording will be sent to all the attendees after the webinar. And if you want to comment on anything and if you have questions, please make sure to change your Zoom chat settings to everyone, so everyone will be able to see that. Great, and let's start right in. I have three phenomenal speakers with me here that would love for each and every one of you to introduce yourself first, and then we'll go to a winter break. And also, while you introduce yourself, please make sure to include what's your favorite winter activity. And our audience, please comment in the chat what's yours. So I'll start with Nathan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nathan Manuel, and I'm the Global Director of Workplace and Employee Experience at PagerDuty. And winter experience, okay, I have to say, so I'm a Texan who's lived in New York most of my life. My winter activities are mostly like wear scarves, eat warm food. And so like I'm trying to think what the like Texas, New Yorker combo of that is. And I'm like, I don't know, chili. I don't know exactly what it is, but eating warm things sounds like it. I don't ski or snowboard or any of those kinds of things. So I'm going with the that lazy approach of eating warm things.
Love it. Maisha, how about you? Please introduce yourself as well.
Thank you. Good day. Maisha Gray Diggs calling in today from Oakland, California. I lead talent inclusion and experience at Eventbrite. And my favorite winter activity is trying to find a warm place to go, although the Bay Area isn't cold like winter, it's very rainy. So trying to find a beach, but if I'm home, it'll be movie and snuggling under a heater and a blanket.
So Maisha, your favorite winter activity is getting away from winter. Got it.
Brad, how about you?
Hey, good afternoon, good morning. Brad Keller. I get to lead workplace strategy for Humana, based out of Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm quickly realizing that this group probably is not going to hang out with me in the winter. Our family's big skiers and enjoy it. And we just got back last week from Bozeman, Montana, where when we landed, it was negative 41 degrees. And we spent 2 days skiing at negative 10. So we teach the kids to bundle up and go have fun.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for that. So I'm Lisa. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Gable. I am not a skier yet. I come from Israel, so I'm very much like Nathan. Ski is not my strong suit by any means. But this is actually an activity that we decided to pick up this year. And I have two little girls, so we are sending them to ski school, and Brad, maybe we will take you up on it and we'll ski together. That's amazing. Great. And I see so many interesting comments from the team, basically a global panel here, which is really cool. So before we dive into the actual session, just a quick overview of Gable. We are the operating system for the modern workplace. We basically help companies to manage hybrid and distributed work by providing access to on-demand space globally for employees, but also helping manage and have visibility to your own offices globally, while helping with collaboration and connection worldwide. And let's dive right in. Well, I would say the topic of this panel and in general, an overarching theme is the transition from in office 5 days a week, very standard 9 to 5 roles, into a plethora or a bell curve as we see it clearly here. This is from a survey that we have actually done and also have based upon different surveys that came out on how companies are using hybrid, remote, or basically redefining work. And it's really interesting to see how each company selects what's right for them. And it will be very interesting to hear also from the panelists about this. But let's start with a poll. So audience, what's your current workplace policy? I already see 100% remote. Great, let's close the poll. Wow, interesting. 37% fully remote, a lot of hybrid. That's great. Okay. Panelists, let's go to you. Please, I would love for Maisha to kickstart, if you can, in terms of, I would say, what's the evolution of the workplace policy from Eventbrite?
Yes, it was interesting looking at the poll because we aren't 100, we're fully remote, but we really are about flexibility. You know, I think we've heard from Brightlings, and that's what we call our employees, that they still want to get together and connect. You know, they want to see people on their team, they want to see other employees. So that has kind of driven us to think about hybrid as well as remote. So we consider ourselves to be workplace flexible. There's some places like in Spain where we have a co-working space. So folks who want to come into the office can. We have one in Australia. We have one as well that we're piloting in New York. So I think we're listening to what the employees want as we think about forming our workplace strategy. I think we have seen and we have made it a priority though to try to get folks together just because we've heard them wanting to connect. So some of that comes in teams. I see in the different Slack channels, teams will say, hey, can we have all-in days? We see this with our finance team. We see this with other teams in the engineering space. They'll say, can we get together? We'll see people getting together around topics, milestones they want to ideate, brainstorm together. We know some of those innovation things happen easier in person. So we'll go get a space for them to do that. And then we have, you know, big company holidays like our Orange Tuesday, where we try to get the entire company together, both virtually and remote, to make sure that people are connecting. So when I think about our strategy, I would say we're being responsive to what our people want and continuing to flex, which makes some challenges sometimes in trying to lock things in long term, I think, but I appreciate, and I think our employees appreciate that we're being flexible.
Amazing. Brad, how about you?
Sure. So at Humana, we've got about 65,000 employees, all pretty much US based because kind of our product type. We also have multiple lines of business within that. And so one thing we find is that there's no one approach that works well across the enterprise. So different businesses have kind of applied it. What we do though is we use work styles as everybody has designated a work style. We had this pre-COVID. And during COVID, we found that we needed to retool what they meant. And so we have 5 for us, and I'll make it really fast here. But basically, a population that we have is about 20% of our population is field, which means they work 100% in the field. They're not in an office and they're not at home. They're in their vehicle. A lot of that's home healthcare or some of our insurance sales agents are out in the field. So you got to kind of put them in their own bucket. And then we have a population that are 100% at home. That's about 56% of our population, meaning never coming in, fully remote, as we would say. We have a percentage of our population, small, about 7%, that are what we call hybrid home, which means kind of falls in a couple of those categories, which means I work mostly at home, but you'll probably see me come in 1, maybe 2 days a week, but my primary office is at home. And then as we get a little bit more in that spectrum, we have about 5% of our population that is hybrid office. That's like myself and my team, which is we come in as a default, but you'll see us at home 1-2 days a week, depending on what's going on. And, you know, typically Fridays fall in that category. Lastly, we have the traditional bucket of office. And for us, that's about 12% of our population. But one thing, there's a misnomer about that. It's not really 12% of office workers. It actually are people that are assigned to facilities. So think about physicians in clinics.
Mm-hmm.
Or pharmacists in pharmacies, or we have a bunch of pharmacy distribution centers, so people that work in our kind of distribution centers. So it's kind of shift workers or clinical workers that really fall into that population where they have to go into that facility 5 days a week or for their job. And then within that, leaders really work with their teams to figure out what's right for each individual.
Wow. And you've done this prior to COVID.
We did. We had it prior to COVID, we had 35% of our population, which was 18,000 people for us, were 100% remote. So we had a big remote workforce. We started in 2002, kind of going into a remote work style, but we had about 26,000 people at the time assigned to facilities, and that has shifted quite a bit. And what we really find is we're really just in certain key areas, you can drive that energy. What we find is when you get below 20 something people, you just kind of lose the energy in those markets. And so we're kind of coming up with a new regional approach in addition to kind of we have a campus at a headquarters location, but what are the regional centers where we can drive that energy and where groups can travel in together to meet?
That's really great. And it's actually pretty much aligned with also, Maisha, what you mentioned on regional, there is the regionality actually matters quite a lot in that sense. Nathan, can you share a little bit about PagerDuty's workplace strategy and also maybe how it evolved from pre-COVID and now?
Sure. So as many of you probably know, PagerDuty is a SaaS platform that supports other operational software. And so as we think about all of the different aspects and types of companies that we're engaging with, it makes a lot of sense for our company to kind of like live our values in that we're supporting highly distributed teams. And so we're a highly distributed team ourselves. That has changed quite a lot over the pandemic. But our focus now really is thinking about, okay, what are those key moments that we want to bring people together? And what are those points of engagement where it's really critical that people have kind of consistent in-person time. And so I think listening to Brad's description at scale is really interesting for a company. So we're 1,300 people, right? And so for us to get a group of people together is pretty reasonable still. So still kind of really manageable as an organization. And so it's really impressive to see that kind of programming he just described at scale, because I think that it's really similar to how we think about having functional teams and geographical teams. And so you have teams that are getting together for a sprint. And so let's say an engineering team is going to get together for a week in the office and a quarter, but then they're really using that week as a kickoff for the work that they're doing over the next couple of months. And so we think of those moments as being really critical in space. And so we have 8 global offices. And so when we think about what those offices are, we have about 14 or so hubs, areas where we have density of employees, but we have these places where we have offices. Those get used more and more as event centers and locations where we have big groups of people coming in for training or for all hands or QBRs. And so that's really that function. And then I'll just speak quickly about, we have a program called the PagerDuty pop-up program, where we go to different regions where we don't have offices, and we'll bring a small team of people from the corporate office to a location, and we'll slice the audience differently. We'll go, okay, for this program, we want to look at people who are in a geography. So you're within 50 miles of Denver. We don't have an office there. We're going to come in for a day and a half. We're going to set up a convention room. We're going to bring everybody in. We're going to have speakers there. We're going to bring people from other parts of the business. We're going to go do something fun. We went to the Coors Field this year and went on a backstage tour. It was a lot of fun. And so you use those opportunities to create a different type of workspace for people so that they feel connected to the business. And it's not everybody, every time somebody has to come to San Francisco or go to Toronto or go to Atlanta to have that experience when they're trying to connect with other Daytonians. And then the last part I would just close that out by saying is, not to pitch Gable as part of your presentation, but the reason we're thinking about that is we've had a massive change in the need for ad hoc space in a way that we didn't have pre-pandemic. And so all of a sudden we have people, let's say 3 people in Raleigh, North Carolina, or 4 people in Raleigh, North Carolina that weren't there before. But now they're like, hey, every once in a while as a sales team, it'd be great for us to have a space where we could do some meetings or get together to do sales prep or whatever it is. And so we're thinking about, okay, what kind of tools or levers do we have for accessing different types of space so that we can more rapidly adjust or be more flexible, to Maisha's point, be more flexible to how we want to think about giving access to space and time together for employees when it's most critical.
Incredible. And I think an overarching thread, at least from what I hear, is flexibility. And I'm wondering, what does flexibility mean in your org? Because you've all said flexibility, but you described it differently, right? One is listening, right, Maisha? Brad, for you, there are like different like different categories, this is also a type of flexibility, right? And Nathan, basically all of what you've described right now, like the different pop-ups, the different slicing of how to bring people together, that may be another color of flexibility. But how did you came up with what flexibility means in your org? Who wants to answer that first?
It feels like it was answered in the chat a bit if you are chat stalking like me. It was surveys, it's conversations, it's meeting with other leaders. I think none of us have the answer. Like there's not just one solution to this. So for me, it's really the listening and surveys, the data, reading, experts, other industries bringing things in. You know, Eventbrite is 900-ish people. So listening to Brad at scale, 18,000 here, 26,000 there, it was like, wow. I mean, that they probably don't have the same, how they think about flexibility at Humana. We're moving a little mouse. You know, they're an elephant-sized company. There's definitely, we get to do a lot of test and learn, I think. And do, like Nathan talked about, 3 employees want to get together in New York or 3 in Charlotte. We have a little more flexibility because we're small, but I do think the other piece is thinking about inclusion. How do we make it seem fair across the board that we're not doing this for just the engineers or just the sales team? I think that's one of the challenges, even in listening, that stays top of mind for me, is how to make it feel equitable across the board.
And Brad, actually, that would be a good follow-up for you. Size matters. How do you define flexibility in that, right? And also, like, how much can you listen to? You know, employees can have a lot of requests and a lot of things, right? But there is also, and you're all smiling because I'm sure you get this every day. But
what are you talking about? Employees don't have requests. They don't need anything. They don't ask for anything.
Yeah. But the question is, how much do you balance this versus, I would say, you know, a top down, those are the business needs, especially at scale, right? Like so many employees, so many business units, complex configurations. Would love to hear your thoughts.
If I'm being fully transparent, I probably shouldn't say this, but I will. My first reaction was
it's only us here. Nobody's here. Don't worry.
Sorry, it's being recorded. My first reaction to your question about what do you think about flexibility is honestly, and bear with me on this, the word waste popped in my mind. And the reason I say that is when you have scale, when we want to provide the flexibility, but that also means that things are underused a lot of the time. Whether it's our facilities, it's our food service, it's the spaces that you were talking about, Nathan, we're to gather in these different markets. Oftentimes we're paying for things that aren't being used. You know, walk around any of these spaces on a Friday, and they're empty. And we've had to alter a lot. You know, our food service is very different on a Friday than it is on a Wednesday. By the way, I couldn't get lunch today because it was so packed because it's a Wednesday. So I had to get a grab and go, which I love, right? The energy is here in the office today. But you can, you know, Friday's a ghost town. And so what it really means though, is it means tailoring your programs. You have to think differently about it. It's co-working memberships in places, it's pop-ups like you were saying. So you're not paying for it 30 days out of the month, you're paying for it the one day when everybody goes to Denver and has that event. So we have to take a lot of our traditional models and throw them out the window and come up with new models to meet that flexibility. I'd also say, I do want to clarify, you know, we're big on flexibility. We had it before the pandemic too, right? On the ability to work in different spots. I just literally left a one-on-one with a teammate who's, you know, asking about my thoughts on them working remotely for a couple months, right? We've been to those, and you have to work through those and with your teammates. And I think there's a lot of flexibility. Lastly, I'll conclude on this. You were talking about numbers earlier. The rest of my life, I'll never forget this number. 8,123 was the number of desktop computers that we had on March of 2020 in buildings, which meant we had to find a solution on how to get those 8,123 computers to people's homes. It took us a long time. By the time we actually figured out how many we had, they'd all figured out how to just put them in their car and drive them home. So it really was a non-effort. But we were trying to figure out how can we untether these people to get them out of the buildings. And ultimately, those desktops have gone away. And most of those people have been replaced with virtual machines or laptops and whatnot. And those were roles that didn't traditionally qualify for it. And so now our technology has made us much more flexible, and we actually have better technology devices that you just need to bring the device. You can leave your charger at home, just come in and touch down and that plug will work and it powers everything. And so we have to rethink that. That was a long answer.
And I think, Nathan, you're like in between in terms of company sizes, right? So like you still can move, like to Maisha's point, you can iterate probably quicker, right? But also there is the sense of, and I definitely relate to Brad, and we see this all the time, underutilized space. You're basically trying to work with what worked before and trying to maximize. How do you balance that? What is the decision-making process? And I'm sure, a lot of the audience is experiencing the same in defining where to put the efforts, right?
Yeah. So I don't think it would be inappropriate for me to tell the world that PagerDuty has been a little bit slower about some of our approach or making decisions about some of these programming and policy than some other tech companies around us. And so some of that has just been, we've been extremely intentional. And so we knew that we had these core values that we wanted to align with. We knew that equity was going to be a big part of our experience. We knew that we wanted to provide a certain type of flexibility for people to be more outcomes based than they were before, maybe. And so it doesn't look as much like, oh, we measure efficiency or effectiveness by how many hours you're in the office. And, let's be clear, there are probably weeks in our lives where being in the office a bunch is really great. You get a lot done, you have a lot of focus, you have less distractions in some scenarios, whatever. But there are a lot of situations too where we want to really emphasize that type of flexibility. And so for us, we were a little bit slower in some of that decision-making and experimentation because we're so intentional. So we have a core hybrid team that is a group, a cross-functional group within the organization that I'm a member of. And we look to address a bunch of different aspects of what that looked like. And that included everything from making RTO policies, but also to making real estate decisions and how we were going to give people certain types of tooling, how we would test products and experiment with ad hoc solutions or different softwares or different security solutions, how we're going to think about providing food to people during the pandemic, if we're going to have home delivery, if we're going to have, buffet style food, but when we're back in the office, all of these different things are basically fed through what I think of in my mind as like a council. And those people really are dedicated to thinking deeply about those issues. And it's really been surprising to me. So somebody on that team is an internal comms person named Lauren. And when I was thinking about her being on that team, I was thinking, oh, she's going to take our ideas and she's going to help us disseminate and internally market those ideas. But the reality is that she's a prime user of how we think about our services. So she's become a really outsized voice within the council because she's so often the person that's like, oh, I don't live near an office. Oh, I don't have access to that thing. Oh, she's the person helping us remind ourselves about the equity, about what that experience is actually like, so that we never lose that vision of like, oh, our customer are these employees. What's good for our customer? What's going to what can we sell our customer? And I think too, maybe mentioned this before, but the talent acquisition part of this is very real. And so all of us have heard that the people who have flexibility or remote first in their job descriptions, the number of applicants is something like 50% more on those job descriptions or on those job recs. And so when we think about what those roles look like and what kind of talent we're trying to attract, I think that this type of flexibility we're describing, this type of intentionality, this type of even being able to say we're experimenting with this is really attractive to that talent pool.
And that's a great point, actually. There are a few things that are happening right now. One, you see this a lot, like there are RTO mandates, or in general, you have to think about this as, there is a shift to that perspective. And would love to hear, from you, Maisha, maybe you'll kickstart us, but how do you feel like RTO and inclusivity, talent acquisition, how do you see this come hand in hand? What have you experimented as well, or experienced and pushed back or not in terms of how to define the strategy?
I'm fortunate not just having been at Eventbrite, but also at Twitter before, where we had been working before the pandemic to really distribute the workforce so that when the pandemic happened, it really was time to just execute the playbook, that we had been building to kind of prepare for wanting to be more distributed. And I think one of the benefits that we've seen, I think those of us on the talent side of this, is that you really are able to attract a much more diverse talent pool than you could before. So as I think about being in Silicon Valley, and I'm a native San Franciscan, so born and raised in San Francisco. I now live in Oakland, but I was gone for 20 years. The Bay Area is a very different place, and it's not very attractive to marginalized communities, regardless. It just isn't. And so when we were making people move to some of these less ideal locations, required relocation, we just weren't seeing the diversity in the talent pool. When we allowed folks the flexibility, we start to see populations in Atlanta, populations in LA, Houston, Arizona, where we see a much more diverse talent pool start to pop up, and our funnels are full, right? That whole pipeline conversation really has stopped because we're in places where the talent is. And they're happier, right? They don't have to move away from their families and their social networks. And so I think as we start to require that, I think you're hearing it very vocal from marginalized and underrepresented communities that they don't want to go back to the office because offices weren't safe places. I know offices, for me, not just the building, some of these cultures weren't as friendly to diverse and marginalized folks. And so they've been, I think quite vocal about not wanting to go back into offices. And it's not about the office or the amenities. It was really about the culture. So I think that's a piece that we have to, I think, address as you see these mandates. Why are we bringing people back to the office, and how do we take care of those who need the flexibility, right? I think you saw a lot of groups that we've been trying to figure out how to get into the workforce. I speak particularly about people with neurodiversity. I speak about people with, physical disabilities. We've been able to really expand those talent pools without them having to come into the office. So there have been so many benefits that we lose when we put RTO mandates in place.
Can I ask a
Nathan
follow-up?
Yes, please, Brad.
Sorry, just when you have a remote workforce, in particular, completely remote and new hire, so that they're not coming into an organization and oftentimes never face-to-face with their leader, their teammates, their peers, how is that affecting attrition and engagement with those teams?
Is the question for me or for Nathan?
I think so. I was throwing it your way.
Yeah.
It's a great point. I think onboarding is where, we've done some quality of hire work, right? When you have a fully distributed team, the quality of hire work shows that onboarding, like we have to get it right? If we're going to hire remote, onboarding, it puts a little more stress there that we have to nail that and really get people to shift from thinking about onboarding being that day one to really being 30, 60, 90 through the first year. So it does put stress on onboarding. I think depending on the industry, especially in tech, it's been really hard, Brad, to look at attrition and year one attrition, because there was a point over the last 3 years where people were staying 3 months, and it was just because the job market was just, there were more jobs than there were job seekers, and they were the money was good. It was free flowing. I think we still see year one attrition now that we're kind of where we are in the job cycle. But to your point, onboarding becomes key, I think, in general, around if you have a bad onboarding experience, whether you're remote or in person, you're less likely to stay. But it does put an onus on us to get onboarding and make it even better than if you were in person seeing your boss, et cetera.
Nathan, do you want to share a little bit about intentionality in onboarding? And also, I would say, how does your team, work with HR? I would say there's also a lot of, cross collaboration, even now more than ever, I would say.
Yeah, I won't speak to onboarding quite as much because I'm definitely more ignorant in that area, but I will speak to our relationship in HR, especially my personal experience has been that, I came from the IT facilities, hard real estate world. And when you come from that world and migrate into the workplace experience world over the last decade or so, and maybe over the last 5 years, it's been even more rapid, that shift. I suddenly, for the first time in PagerDuty, am reporting to a chief people officer instead of a CFO for the first time in my life. And so every day, when we think about the employee experience, we're thinking about all of the different parts of that life cycle. And so, yeah, when we think about, when you're starting the organization, are we going to ask you to come in a little bit more often to a physical space and see some people? Probably. Are we going to ask you to be on more meetings and shadowing with people, even if that's virtually more often? Yes, we're going to do that. And when we think about what that employee experience is, there's a bunch of different aspects about how we were trying to really instill values and engage people right up front. And it's a kind of an intense process. And we have someone named Courtney Schneider on our team that's really focused on that kind of people development aspect that I think is doing an excellent job in figuring out what that looks like for us today and updating that programming. And I think it's really key because what worked before is not going to work now. It's a very much what got us here isn't going to get us there kind of situation. And so I think that that's pretty clear. And so, I was literally sitting around the dinner table last night talking with my wife about how are we still talking about these things? And her answer was so simple. It's not solved. It's you're going to keep talking about it. You're going to have this focus until the dust is settled a little bit. And so even though we thought in our minds, this pandemic's only going to last 3 months. The impacts of this is only going to last a year. It's only going to last 3 years. Okay, whatever it is, right? Until it's settled, it's not settled. And so I feel like we're very much in that mode of taking in the new information. You were talking about engagement surveys. PagerDuty has the highest rate of engagement survey response I've ever seen in a company. It's something around 95%. We have just really intense engagement in regards to that. And our attrition, right now is extremely low. Yes, I know the job market's tight. Yes, I know we're probably all seeing those LinkedIn articles saying 85% of people are considering changing their jobs this year. All of these kinds of things are out there. But with that said, we're taking in the new information, looking at data for the first time in my life. There's been real data in regards to how we think about the workplace experience, how we think about the employee experience, and then how we start to go, okay, I always wanted the data about that thing. Well, shit, now I have it. Now I've got to actually do something with it, the responsibility of having that data. And so I think we're thinking a lot about how to implement those ideas, take that engagement survey data, I think we've talked about this. We have utilization data for our spaces. We use sensors inside of offices. We use all sorts of different pieces of information to understand, okay, how do we take that and then think about how, again, our customer, what do we do with our customer? How do we actually support that customer? And right now, I know we've talked about flexibility. I know we've talked about some of these things, but it's really trying to create a package of those things that serve the business well, serve the velocity of the business, allow for us to be really successful, and then also simultaneously support our employees. And I'll just say one more thing about that, and then I'll pass on. I mean, that's to say, when we think about efficiency measures, right? One of the real dangers I see with being efficiency driven versus being outcome driven is that we have people working more hours than they've ever worked. That lack of commute time didn't become free time with their kids. It became a little 45 minutes extra time that they're going to work every day or whatever. And so I'm really mindful of what that looks like. And so, I think that if we think more about what are we trying to achieve as a team? What are we trying to sell to our customers as a product? What are we trying to put out into the world? And we're working towards those things as a team rather than, did you punch the right amount of hours this week? We're going to find ourselves in a more flexible, more supportive, and more equitable kind of experience for all of our employees.
And I think it's amazing. And I think the key point that you said is basically data and having the right data to make decisions. I'm wondering again, Brad, in your scale, right? What data are you looking at? And the fact that you have 5 verticals of types of employees, what data are you looking at, with such diverse configuration? That's one. And 2, I think that the metrics probably are very different. So if you can share a little bit.
Yeah, educate us.
Educate us.
Just to clarify, we don't have any other, there's no silver bullets here, as we kind of said, it's unsolved, like you said earlier. I think, there was an interesting comment in the chat about productivity. Productivity is a data point that we look at. I'll let the cat out of the bag on this one. Productivity has not suffered by and large across our groups. And we do have a lot of different productivity measures depending on the unit. So if you think about a call center type function or a claims processing function, there are software systems that they've had in place long before the pandemic to measure the productivity of teams. So we do have historical data. Typically, we see it to be either flat or in some cases slight upticking. Now, there's been automation and other changes too that contribute to that. We look at obviously engagement data as a big piece, culture, engagement, high survey response rates for us annually. We see that, it can be tough right now too. Some of the engagements aren't as high as they had been pre-pandemic in some cases. In the workplace side of things, one of the things that's really interesting is we had to take all of our old metrics and throw them out the window again. Our window's really big. We can just keep throwing stuff out. We don't look at square foot per person or a lot of those old metrics. One of the things that our team is most interested in is unique visits. How often did that person come in? Was it once a month? Was it once a week? What's the return visit frequency? So if we did get somebody back in, what's the chance that they came back the following week? I mean, if you think about it, it's a very sales kind of approach from a retail kind of standpoint. You're looking for how often are we attracting them back? And where did they go in the facility? And how many different amenities did they use? Did they happen to use the coffee shop? Did they happen to use the lounge area, the conference center, try to get them other than just coming to a desk for 8 hours, because that's not what most people are doing. So it's a vast array of it. We've tried to bring different data points together. Admittedly, every time we have to pull a new report, we're kind of pulling from different systems to see what seems to be working right now.
And I think that's one of the things that you mentioned in terms of like the metrics, or in general, like it's not square foot and utilization and all of that. It's actually, and I see this across also our customer base, but in general, the overarching thing that I would say, use space for collaboration much more than butts in seats, basically. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit how did you change either your spaces, if you did, or if you are planning to, for that purpose, or how in general you're thinking about events and collaboration as the glue for bringing people together. And we already heard a few things from the panel, but Brad, I'll start with you because it's very relevant to the metrics that you mentioned.
Full disclosure, we got really lucky. A lot of this was pure luck in that we had been really behind on updating our collaboration spaces and had been working on two projects on our campus here that were very large, very expensive projects. Just so happened we were kicking them off in around March of 2020. They were going to be about 2-year projects. So when our buildings were empty, we actually got to go into overdrive. These were already designed. They were already funded projects. But what's funny is that our employees think that we did it to return to work kind of thing. So the doors opened in March of 2022, and you had these great spaces. So that was the luck side, was we had been working on it. And what was great is these were all the amenity spaces. So all the food spaces, our internal co-working spaces. So if you think about it, these are shared spaces within the buildings that were, very nice teched out, reservable spaces. So our conference centers are really where people are coming back to. And I think I don't like that term conference center because it kind of reminds you of the old kind of spaces. These don't look like it. They've got a fireplace, they've got a loungy area, a coffee shop. They're very much hospitality. And I'm going to use that word a few more times in our short time left, is hospitality. And I'll just say one big change that we have done is we've pushed a community manager model that we borrowed from the WeWorks and Industriouses of the world that were successful in that. In fact, I just met one of our brand new team members coming from one of those companies yesterday. And we have smiling faces. And so you think about it, used to be you'd walk into a building and you go straight to your desk, you knew what to do, you knew where to park. And now almost every day I can tell you who it's the first time in months coming in, because they walk in, look around, not knowing where to go. But we've got a team member there that's greeting them. How can I help you get set up? And so it changes it, and we feel more like a hotel than an office space.
That's amazing. Nathan, how about you?
I think that is so spot on. And I mentioned early on in this call that we think about our spaces being used more and more for events. And when you think about that, you really are dealing with unique visitors a lot of the time. People are traveling to your location. So a really interesting little piece of data is that only about 40% of our employees live within a commutable distance of all of our offices globally. And so when you think about that number, it means that the majority of your people would have to travel, quote unquote, to get to you. It might be a long drive, it might be whatever that is. But so often when we're having a QBR or we're having some kind of kickoff event or a project kickoff, it's a lot of people who are actually traveling, the super commuters are traveling, you know, a real distance to come to your office. And so when I think about who those people are, what their experience is, everything is a first, as you know, as Brad's describing. You know, they're getting their security process done for the first time that day. They're getting their picture taken. They're getting their badge. So whatever it is, it's all new and fresh. And so when we think about what our workplace experience people on the ground, what their job is, it is hospitality. So much of that is reminding them that we're on the same team. We're here to support you. You know, our job is to literally make sure that you're having a good experience so that when you come in, you're not having to be distracted or thinking too much about like, oh, how do I do X, Y, and Z in the space, that we're really teeing up the space for you in such a way that you have a really amazing experience. And so one of the things, Misha, I've been thinking about a lot, and I've been talking about is oftentimes I don't feel like I can provide equity, but I do feel like I can provide excellence. And so I'm trying to think about what that is when people come into the office versus when they're at home, because I want them to have an excellent experience no matter what. I want them to have an equitable experience whenever I can, but I don't feel like I have all the control, because so often we as businesses are transferring this piece of labor and this piece of expectation and experience away from the business and onto the employees. And so as we think about that transfer of labor over to them and what their experience is at home, we have to think about, well, how do we provide any kind of equability in that transfer of leverage? And so, yeah, I'm thinking a lot about the different ways that that experience happens. And I think that that word hospitality is just really key as we think more and more about becoming an events-driven business. And Lisa, just really quickly, I know that in our conversations with Gable, we often were saying to you, like, so often these spaces are going to be used for events. It's going to be used for a sales outing, or it's going to be used for a development team getting together and doing some whiteboarding or whatever. And so whatever those kind of like collaboration events are, you know, it's really important that no matter what the space is, that it's accommodating that type of work.
And honestly, we see this more and more across our company base as well, is to focus on events and collaboration. That's, you know, part of the things that we are definitely focused on. And maybe if you can touch upon this again, and I do think that you have already created some programming around that, but also iterating on that quite a lot. Like, what types of you know, reasons call for events? Is it more regional? Is it more focused on the actual, you know, business unit? How do you see this at scale, especially when most of your workforce is remote?
Yes, I think it's both, right? I think what I'm most proud of is that, one, we've recognized that this work can't be done off the side of anybody's desk, that we need, as Nathan has said multiple times, we need to be intentional about it. And so we recently hired a director of culture, community, and events, because it really is, when you think about Eventbrite, what happened in 2020, we know what happened to us during the pandemic. Since then, 75% of our employees are 0 to 3, the 0 to 3 year population was hired after the pandemic. So all of us, and we're virtual, right? Most of us are virtual. So we really needed to focus on culture and community, because there's just so much newness to our 17-year-old company. And so having someone whose job this is, Chris Martinez joined us from Oyster. Oyster was 100% remote. So like, it's ingrained in how he works. And so I really look forward to him coming in and helping us get better at this, right? And bringing the intentionality of, when do we have a regional join up? When are we going to have a team join up? When do we just have the local join up that's impromptu? And how do we, one of the focuses is not just on him doing it, but is in creating that DIY playbook, so that if I decide I want to have a pop-up and Taco Tuesday, how do I make sure that it is inclusive? So you see where my mind is, Taco Tuesday. So how do I do that in my region, so that, again, we have more culture carriers? You know, while it is going to be his role, you know, part of it will be, how do we make everyone a culture carrier, right? Because day to day, I work with Nathan. I'm not going to necessarily be working with Chris. And those are the moments that matter, the day-to-day interaction that help decide and help employees, help us retain employees. It's not always the big 3-day conference. You know, that might give you a 6-month bump, but it's the day-to-day. So really wanting, our focus is going to be on creating more culture carriers and ambassadors to this work.
And it's a phenomenal, and really thinking about how can you empower one, middle management, two is also, again, creating a playbook that is repeatable and effectively making this as an extension of your team all across, I think is really powerful. We're at time. Thank you everyone who joined us. I cannot believe this has passed so fast. I have so many questions for you all, but I'll stop here. Thank you everyone who joined us. Thank you for the incredible speakers. It was really interesting to hear what everyone's thinking, and the bottom line is that we're still figuring this out, right? Thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.